Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the National Disaster Risk Management Bill, National Assembly Bill number 24 of 2023, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first time that this bill is coming to this House. In 2014, or I think it was 2015, Mr. Speaker, when we had the Westgate attack, it was mooted the idea to have an agency that coordinates our disaster response. Because reading afterwards of that disaster, Mr. Speaker, it was said that the first responders actually spent quite a substantial amount of time arguing on basic protocols, Mr. Speaker, on how to respond, Mr. Speaker, to disasters such as those and so many others, Mr. Speaker, where there was argument on who should do what, which commander cannot take orders from the other, and many such things, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, the idea to actually have an institution that coordinates our disaster risk management, Mr. Speaker, was mooted. And it's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that has taken this long. I see now this is actually introduced as a National Assembly bill. And because Senate many times is magnanimous and rises beyond petty institutional ego wars, Mr. Speaker, we proceed to consider this particular bill, despite the fact that I know for a fact, and Senator Moses Kajwang will bear me witness, that the initial drafters of this bill actually is the Senate of the Republic of Kenya through members of this House. Mr. Speaker, this bill, as presently presented to this House, was actually first read, published actually rather, that's the title I was looking for, in the Kenya Gazette Supplement number 80 of 2023, in the 31st of May 2023, and read the first time here in the Senate on the 3rd of July 2024. As I have pointed out, Mr. Speaker, that the principal object of this bill is to provide a legal framework for the coordination of disaster risk management activities in both levels of government. And it's important to point out, Mr. Speaker, that this has actually evolved because at that particular time, and if you follow through many legislations, Mr. Speaker, if you're a keen follower of our legislative processes, Mr. Speaker, you know that even in that particular time, despite the fact that we're in the devolution cycle, we didn't do legislations, Mr. Speaker, with county governments in mind. I want to appreciate the improvement that has come of late, Mr. Speaker, where when you replicate or when you do a body at the national level, you try, much as there is still a lot more to be done, Mr. Speaker, and replicate a similar institution at the county level, Madam Speaker. The only concern, and I agree many times, Mr. Speaker, I know I am the mover of this bill, and therefore I move the bill as is and leave it to the House to inform the second stage and the third and the final stage on how to amend and perhaps make the bill better, because a good idea can always give a way to a better idea, Mr. Speaker. But I must put a disclaimer, Mr. Speaker, that I have insisted, and I have said this to all authorities, including to the highest office of the land, Mr. Speaker, that I am not comfortable at all with the creation of any new agency in this country, Mr. Speaker. That we have sufficient agencies to do all or anything that arises. Therefore, if there is thinking, Mr. Speaker, that a certain new agency needs to be brought on board, like now this particular National Disaster Risk Management Agency, Mr. Speaker, then such legislations must be accompanied by transition clauses of which other institutions we are folding up. Otherwise, if we continue with this practice, Mr. Speaker, to the best of my count, we have more than 350 state agencies, Mr. Speaker. And you wonder doing what? We have county governments, we have ministries, we have state departments, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I want to challenge the committee actually that is considering this legislation to particularly point out and establish many of these institutions that we are trying to help them coordinate and come together, Mr. Speaker, on the transitional amendments that shall come out of this bill, Mr. Speaker. We need to wound up those institutions so that even the staff actually can be part and parcel of this institution. Because, Mr. Speaker, we keep on talking about the wage bill, the struggles that we were talking about a few minutes ago, why we are not creating jobs locally, Mr. Speaker, is because it is extremely expensive to run government of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. And part of the reason that makes it expensive to run government, Mr. Speaker, is because of recurrent expenditure. We are employing too few people, Mr. Speaker, at the expense of millions others, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I hope actually that when our committees retire to bring a report to this House on this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, they will be guiding the House towards the merger, Mr. Speaker, of different agencies. I know there are different agencies that respond actually to the various disasters actually. National drought, I don't know which one, and this and the other, Mr. Speaker. We must, if we are creating an agency, Mr. Speaker, then all those institutions must be folded up, Mr. Speaker, and come into this one institution that responds to disasters, Mr. Speaker. The bill further seeks to establish the county disaster risk management committees in each of our counties, as the role of disaster risk management is a shared function between the national and county government under the fourth schedule of our constitution, Mr. Speaker. And that is a fact, Mr. Speaker, because there are certain disasters that actually occur at the county levels, which our county governments have ability to assess the risk, Mr. Speaker, and mitigate. The main premise of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to approach disaster risk management in a manner that seeks to respond to effectively in a timely manner to any disaster or risk of disaster, and to prevent the adverse effects of disaster recovery as far as possible, and the livelihood of the communities, Mr. Speaker, that are affected actually by these disasters, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Madam Speaker, the establishment of a comprehensive framework will outline actually the strategies for how to mitigate, how to prepare, Mr. Speaker, how to respond, recovery, that will better protect our citizens and infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. We risk leaving actually people will represent in this House, Mr. Speaker, to the devastating impacts of disaster. Therefore, it is imperative that we prioritize the passage of this bill, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, to safeguard the well-being of our country and the people that we represent in this House, Mr. Speaker. Part 1 of the bill is all about preliminary provisions, Madam Speaker, of the name, the title, the object of the act. Part 2 of the bill, Madam Speaker, establishes actually the institutional framework on disaster risk management, which includes National Disaster Risk Management Authority, the authority that I've spoken into, Mr. Speaker, and I've said, I expect, Madam Speaker, that before the final passage of this bill, that we must include transitional clause, just like we did for SHIF, Madam Speaker, and transiting NHIF. I am very clear in my mind, Madam Speaker, that this country does not need any new agency, any new institution. We can only make better that which we have. And therefore, if we are creating a new authority, Madam Speaker, it is on the understanding and the premise that there are other institutions that we are actually either winding up completely or transitioning its people, its operations into the new agency, so that you don't end up with a continuous recurring bill, Madam Speaker, of close to 1 trillion Kenya shillings, Madam Speaker, just paying a few government workers, Mr. Speaker, while millions others continue to languish in poverty for lack of opportunity because we are not able to manage, Madam Speaker. We must make government lean and efficient. And part of making it lean and efficient, Madam Speaker, is to look keenly actually and read through. And in fact, I wish the members of the National Cohesion Committee, Mr. Speaker, were part and parcel of us. Actually, we said it in the bipartisan motion that we passed here when we had the challenges that we had in June. And I hope, Madam Speaker, like somebody observed this afternoon, you know, we had given actually our committees 30 days to look into the resolutions that were into that bipartisan motion. I hope our committee chairpersons can soon start to pass or give us actually resolutions of how far they are in implementing the resolutions that this House had passed at that particular time. It will be a waste of the country's emotion, the country's time, Madam Speaker, having spent the time that we spent here, speaking so candidly to each other, to only let them lie in the hands of Madam Speaker. I expect, Madam Speaker, that each of our chairpersons that we tasked with the various responsibilities will begin reporting back to the Senate on the actions that they have taken as directed by that particular motion when we spoke here in the month of June, Madam Speaker. I was speaking to part 2, Madam Speaker. Part 3 of the bill contains provisions on dealing with the manner in which disasters may be classified and the establishment of the disaster electric information system, ways in which you are able to detect actually disaster, Madam Speaker, and the risk that is available. Technology is available worldwide, Madam Speaker, including here in Kenya, on ways in which you can point out and, you know, signal people way ahead of time, Madam Speaker, the people that were victims of floods here in the month of April, Madam Speaker, if we had such detection mechanisms, Madam Speaker, we would have sent the early warning systems out to detect, Madam Speaker, and inform people to either move away from the causes of those floods, Madam Speaker, and therefore saving life. Part 5, Madam Speaker, contains the provisions on institutional framework at the county level. And I said this is particularly important, and I'm happy about this, Madam Speaker, because it speaks to the growth of the Senate as a legislature in terms of, and even the office actually, of the drafters of this legislation, Madam Speaker, that there is an appreciation in the country, Madam Speaker, that there are 2 levels of government. This was a rare occurrence, Madam Speaker, in the 2013 to 2017 Senate. Many times we'd pass legislation and leave it to fight. Our understanding then and appreciation of devolution was that you either do a silo law for the national government and one for county government, Madam Speaker. But this interdependence and coordination, Madam Speaker, of actually the 2 levels of government, Madam Speaker, is a welcome improvement. Therefore, Part 4 speak to that particular issue of setting up of this institution actually at the county level, where you're setting up what is being referred to as the risk management committees to act as a focal point for coordination of disaster risk management activities at the county level and give information either to the national office or to the county governor's office, Madam Speaker, for mitigation of risk, Madam Speaker, and response to disaster. Part 5 contains the financial provisions, which include the funds of the authority, financial year, annual estimates, as well as accounts and audit of the authority. And this is where I disagree greatly with our colleagues in the National Assembly, Madam Speaker, with tremendous respect to them. They are the house that actually handles the budget. They know the fiscal difficulties that this country continues to exercise. Yet, they send to this house a bill that creates an extra authority without deference to what do you do with other institutions that are already doing work that is similar to this. I expect a house that interacts with the budget of the Republic of Kenya, appreciating the difficulty and the challenges that we are in presently as a country, Madam Speaker, to at least have accompanied, because, you know, Madam Speaker, finances are not infinite. These are resources that are scarce. If you're putting finances to a particular place, then it follows naturally that another place must lose. It is this idea that resources are infinite. There's a lack of appreciation, and I'm sorry to say this, on the part of our colleagues in the National Assembly, to know that there is a limit to which you can create authorities and continue to charge the exchequer, Madam Speaker, without actually putting a strain to the economy of this republic. I expect them, Madam Speaker, that anytime you propose an authority, unless there is no other authority or state agency, Madam Speaker, including a ministry that speaks or addresses matters that are being proposed in that agency, Madam Speaker, to remove, because it's an addition on one side and a subtraction on the other, Madam Speaker, because these are resources that are scarce, and therefore I expect a lot of work to be done on Part 5 of the bill by members of our committee. Part 6, Madam Speaker, as I draw to a close, contains miscellaneous provisions on the protection of information held by the authority and county committees. These also create offenses and prescribes penalties thereto. You know, Madam Speaker, I have seen, for example, when the national government has issued directives. You remember that here in Nairobi, where Senator Sifuna represents, there are many people that died along the banks of Nairobi River when it banks. When the government issued directive the other day and said that we need to move people who are living within the riverbanks, you find some third-grade politicians, Mr. Speaker, some occupying very high offices in this country, Mr. Speaker, reducing it to be an issue about tribe. How tragic can it be, Mr. Speaker? I don't think that the people that died in the month of April belong to any particular tribe. Those are Kenyans, and we expect that any responsible leader will expect to guide those people and tell them that you are endangering your lives. Let government provide alternative places for those people to live. Those are the offenses that are being referred to in this particular bill after identifying the risk, because it is also, Madam Speaker, dangerous for you to be informed that there's a risk here, don't occupy this particular part, and you continue to defy, Madam Speaker. We must provide sanctions to Kenyans who want to continue to do such things, or even institutions you know, Madam Speaker, that continues to endanger the lives of people. Madam Speaker, it is only in Nairobi and in this country where you find actually a government agency or a government department. They go ahead and dig a huge trench in a part of the road where citizens are used to passing with no warnings, and they leave for the night. In the course of the night, when people are walking, people are jogging, Madam Speaker, people fall into that particular ditch. Some even die, you know, get accidents, Madam Speaker. Yet there are no sanctions against such institutions. That's part of the risk occurrences, Madam Speaker, that we need to point out, so that any agency that causes harm to people by creating a risk and not providing the proper mechanism through which you ensure that you don't put the lives of others at risk while undergoing either repairs or creating something, Madam Speaker, we need to sanction such institutions, Madam Speaker. And that is part of what is being provided in Part 6. Part 7, Madam Speaker, contains the provisions of delegated powers. In terms of these powers, the CS responsible for matters responsible of disaster risk management may, in consultation with the Council of Governors, make regulations generally for the better carrying effect of the provisions of this Act, Madam Speaker. As I conclude, I wish to state that this is a very important bill, and therefore I urge honorable senators to read, internalize, and improve on this particular bill, Madam Speaker, so that we can conclude on it and ensure that our citizens actually live in a safer country. With those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request the Majority Whip, Senator Boni Halwale, to second.